Now I want to note something, and that thing is that one of the areas where people get a little bit caught up in this or confused is in the previous example, what I was looking at was the number of minutes it took them to carry out in other words, we were looking at minutes per unit. But oftentimes we also might talk in terms of units per minute, or maybe per hour. So let's look at, in this case, units per hour. So in the course of an hour, how many grasses do they each do? In this case, Kak Osman carries out 40, takes care of 40 grasses, and Kak Osman takes care of 80 flowers. Kak Aland takes care of 120 grasses and 120 flowers. It turns out in this instance, now, as I've drawn this, Aland has the absolute advantage. He's better at everything than Kak Osman. So clearly they shouldn't specialize and trade. Well, hopefully by now you know that what we want to do is turn this into opportunity costs. So in an hour, Kak Osman gains 40 grass. And what does he give up? He gives up 80 flowers. So for each grass he takes care of, how many flowers does he give up? He gives up 2 flowers. On the other hand, when he spends an hour taking care of the flowers, he gets 40 grass, which means that for each flower he produces, he gives up half a grass. Kak Aland, on the other hand, so Kak Aland has an absolute advantage. How about a comparative advantage? Well, in comparative terms, who gives up less? Kak Osman gives up 2 flowers. Kak Aland gives up 1 flower. Kak Aland has a lower opportunity cost. Kak Osman gives up half a grass to take care of a flower. Kak Aland gives up 1 grass to take care of a flower. Who has the lowest opportunity cost? Kak Osman does. Okay? So again, the tricky part here is, are you looking at units of the good or activity per unit of time, or amount of time per unit of the good? But the key here is we're just trying to think in terms of opportunity cost. Again, one of the things is, maybe in this situation Kak Aland says, you know, I'm really a lot better than Kak Osman. He has nothing to contribute. But hopefully you can realize from this that that's not true. In comparative terms, everybody is the best at something, and everybody has something to contribute. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about understanding comparative advantage. So a couple years ago, I went to a friend's wedding, and we went out to the wedding dinner at this restaurant, and I saw somebody bussing tables. And you can, since you're at home, you can probably Google this. There was a drug, I think that's how you spell it, but there was a drug handed out in the 60s and 70s that minimized morning sickness for women. Thalidomide made the nausea a lot easier. Turns out it also had a tendency to cause severe birth defects. And one of the birth defects would be people with these really short little kind of Tyrannosaurus Rex arms. So at this wedding, I saw this older guy bussing tables, and he had these little tiny arms. And I said, oh, he must be, right? He was a child of thalidomide. His mother was probably prescribed that when he was in the womb. And a lot of people would say, oh, how nice that the restaurant is giving him this opportunity. How nice that somebody has taken pity on him. And that it probably is true. It's nice that they were looking out for a member of their community. But it also, if we think about this in comparative advantage terms, that gentleman was probably the best person in his community at doing those things. By doing things, now he was probably slower than most people at bussing tables, although he may have learned some along the way, he may have learned by doing, but in comparative advantage terms, he was probably the best at that. So I think that's pretty cool. I think that's neat. It actually provides us with analytic justification for the moral and even philosophic claims that many religions or philosophies have, which is that everybody has dignity and everybody is special. That's why I think comparative advantage is an important idea. Because it's really not all that necessary for gains from trade. We're going to have gains from trade. Of course, once you bring in comparative advantage, it means that the gains from trade are almost always going to be bigger than they would be if we didn't have this idea. Now, should we specialize in trade if people had the same abilities? Well, hopefully you know the answer is yes. The answer is yes, we should. Why? Because there's still maybe people have different preferences, maybe they have different endowments. But let's just take a picture. Let's take a situation where Kakosman and Kakaland, we have the grass and we have the flowers, and maybe it takes them each 120 and 120 and 120 and 120. In this instance, is there any comparative advantage? We could even do this. Let's make this a little bit. Now, of course, to actually work this out, we're going to have to fill something in here, but does anybody here have a comparative advantage? Doesn't matter how we're measuring this, it turns out that either, right, that it's 1 for 1. It's going to be a 1 for 1 here. So, in this situation, Kakosman would have an absolute advantage, and there would be no comparative advantage. However, does that mean we shouldn't specialize in trade? I would argue not, because there will almost certainly still be gains to be had as a result of specialization in trade. And one of the ways in which we could save, here I'll just do this, this would be per day. Yeah. So if this is in units per day, Kakaland is going to have the absolute advantage. Now, what do you think would happen if they specialize? Well, they might save some on switching time. And that wouldn't be reflected up in here. They'd both be a little bit better off. Right? Osman, maybe we just flip a coin. Or we ask people what they would rather do. But let's just pick one. Maybe Osman specializes in grass. And in the process, he saves some on switching time. Maybe it's only 10 minutes. And instead of it taking him 120 minutes, it takes him 115 minutes. Oops, sorry. I'm going to be thinking about it in this direction. So let's put it back in terms of minutes. In this case now, Osman has the absolute advantage. Now, if they specialize, they're going to save some on switching time. Of course, why else might there be gains to be had from specialization? One of those is going to be learning. Now, over time, do you think they might learn? Yeah. Let's say that now, Osman learns how to take care of the grass. And maybe Kakaland here learns how to be more effective at the flowers. So Osman, just because we flipped a coin, specialized there, and Kakaland specialized there. This is really what Henry Ford's moving assembly line did. Was it just put people to save on switching time in one location. Now, after we've learned in the 50 minutes that it takes him to take care of the grass, how many flowers could he have taken care of? Well, it turns out the cost per grass is 5/6 of a flower. And the cost here, when he takes care of the flowers, is 6/5, or 1 1/5, maybe that's easier for some of you, of a grass. And Kakaland here, it takes him, let's think about this, in 120 minutes, how many flowers could he have taken care of? He could have taken care of 121 hundredths, which works out to 12 tenths or 6 fifths of a flower. And when he takes care of the flowers, he gives up 5/6 of a grass. This, by the way, works out to be 1 1/5. So now that they've learned, guess what? It turns out that despite them starting out without a comparative advantage, now who gives up more to take care of the grass? Turns out that now Kak Aland gives up more to take care of the grass, and Kak Osman has a comparative advantage in grass. On the other hand, flowers, as a result of just saving on switching time and then learning, now it turns out that Kak Aland is more effective, has a comparative advantage in flowers.